Podcasts of Joe Walsh and Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Good morning, Dan and Amy, and I find it fascinating, the D.C. press corps reporting Trump's remarks at the UN the other day, his press conference yesterday, where in part he talked trade, of course, including his canceling a meeting with that fifth grade drama teacher who runs Canada because the discussions haven't been productive. But of course, the big question is about tariffs and the impact on tariffs. And it's fascinating looking at all these stories where the D.C. press corps is reporting on the economic impact of tariffs. This is the only tax that they actually assess in terms of economic impact, a tariff imposed by a GOP president. Now, I don't support the tariff increase, the tax increases in the form of tariffs. I don't support Trump's protectionist trade policies, but I do find it interesting that would you get and do you get fair and complete analyses of the impact of tax cuts? No, no interest there. Or do you get fair and complete reporting, even at an Econ 101 level, of tax increases, personal, corporate, capital? No. But when a GOP president imposes tariffs on a country like China that is in violation of all the WTO accords, in addition to just sort of the rule of international law when it comes to intellectual piracy, then we need to talk to California farmers, a pistachio grower in California, complaining about the heavy tariffs being placed on him by China. Ford Motor Company, the CEO of Ford Motor, Jim Hackett, saying the steel tariffs, took about $1 billion in profits from us. And the irony is that we secure most of the steel in the U.S. today anyway. Again, tax increases on productive capacity, bad idea, which is why I oppose tariffs. But I just, the focus of discussion when it comes to this issue from the D.C. press corps, how it's reported with respect to farmers, they suddenly rediscover. And they're now very concerned about farmers' income. And they're very concerned about our ability to export domestically produced products, whether they be farm products or products from other sectors. It's just interesting to note. For more on this topic, as well as the unanimous decision yesterday by the Fed to lift the benchmark federal funds rate to a range of between 2 and 2.25%, and what that portends for unwinding us from a decade of quantitative easing, with one more scheduled rate hike reported to be in the offing before year's end. We're pleased to be joined by Jim Iuorio. He is a CNBC contributor and an entrepreneur who owns Brandt's in Palatine, best burger this side of the Mississippi, as I understand it. Jim Iuorio, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with the Fed. Actually, you know what? Let's start with what I was saying about tariffs and the media's interest in this tax because it's promulgated by a GOP president and virtually no other when it comes to impact. How have you responded to all of the reporting being done on the impacts of the tariffs Trump has imposed?
Well, here's the thing that's interesting to me, and it takes out something that you said a second ago that we're conditioned to. You said Trump's protectionist trade policies, and that's certainly one way to look at it. But the way I've always looked at it, and I think the way the market has looked at it, is that he is a free trade president. He's a proponent of free trade, and he was using these tools to achieve that end. And I know it seems ironic, but it's the same sort of irony as a police officer carrying a gun. He's not pro-violence. He's against violence. But Trump and Larry Kudlow are against tariffs, but particularly they were against the tariffs that the rest of the world was charging on us. Now, you and I both agree that this might not be the best way. I actually think it's not a good way at all. But if it works out, particularly if it works out in the next 6 weeks and some of these trade partners are willing to negotiate, he's going to look like a genius. But I want to underscore the point that these are always put in as a tool to fight tariffs. And I understand the irony as well as anyone else, but I refuse to say that he has protectionist trade policies when his goal is to eliminate protections to trade.
Yeah, but what about the auto industry? I mean, you had the Ford CEO saying that their company faces $1 billion in lost profits.
Well, and I think that's a big deal. And then you can look at cars, you can look at planes, you can look at brewers, you can look at Campbell's Soup Company. There are a lot of companies that probably are going to suffer from this. I thought it would be in technology as well, but some of the bigger names get exemptions.
Yeah,
but if you look at Ford, Micron Technology, corn, and soybeans, and you put those charts all up together, you can tell that that's a very real worry in I'm going to say a fairly small part of the stock market, the corporate picture that's taking the brunt of this, where the overall market seems to be relatively buoyant. So is it a big deal? Sure, it's a big deal. But up until this point, the market had viewed it as a vehicle toward free trade. As these, and I'm going to look at those four charts that I mentioned, if they continue another leg down, I think it's going to be morphing from a transitory period to something that's becoming more of a reality, and that's the tariffs.
Well, I hope, as long as Larry Kudlow is there, I have hope. But if he goes away, then I think my optimism will as well about where Trump where Trump is willing to end up, I should say. Because, you still have this problem, and he mentioned it at his presser yesterday. He mentioned it in his otherwise rather remarkable speech before the UN General Assembly a couple of days ago. The trade imbalances and the idea that a trade deficit is somehow a wealth being extracted from this country. His misunderstanding of trade deficits perhaps is the greatest concern I have in terms of where he is willing to settle for an outcome.
Amen. And I actually think it's funny is that when he should be talking about things like intellectual property theft from China, he should be talking about currency manipulations from some of our biggest trade partners, and those are the things we want agreements on. The trade deficit, as you said, is a very difficult thing to ascertain whether it's positive or negative on us. So, yeah, I think that's not the right place to be looking. When you mentioned Larry Kudlow, Larry Kudlow, who I've known is a close friend for years, has always been one of his mantras is, free market capitalism is the best path to prosperity. I've heard him say it 1,000 times. It was his catchline on his show.
Right.
So for me to say he's a free market guy, well, yeah, I've heard him say it a lot of times, and I know that's the goal he's trying to get to.
Yeah, no question, and I don't dispute that at all. That's why I'm so happy he's there in Trump's ear. Let me ask you about your assessment of the interest rate hike yesterday. President Trump didn't greet that with enthusiasm for obvious reasons, but is it a necessary step to normalize interest rates and unwind from a decade of easy money, and what are the short-term impacts?
Yeah, no doubt. I think that hiking rates is the appropriate thing to do. I think that what he did yesterday was more appropriate than before, and that he sounded a little dovish. He didn't increase any tightening/hawkish tone, and the market viewed it as somewhat placating. And the stock market rallied afterwards, and I know it turned around and broke later, but then to me, that means it's just a market position trade, the weakness that followed the strength. The strength for the first hour was the actual interpretation of what he said, and yes, he did tighten, and yes, he's going to tighten the rest of one more time this year, at least that's what he's planning on, but he is willing to consider data as it comes out. And I think when he sounded a little more dovish, I think it was partially because of geopolitical tensions and tariffs, although I don't believe he mentioned them by name. But I think that if they become the new reality, well, then the Fed might have to respond.
Our friend and yours, Scott Shellady, Fox Business contributor, suggests that, look, there are some warning signs with respect to the market and a correction, but he doesn't see anything in the immediate offing, not at least until corporate profits are less robust than they currently are.
Right. And you'll hear a bunch of pundits on TV say this is a long bull market, a 10-year bull market. That's not really true in my opinion. 2015, 2016 were sideways at best in the market, and we spent 4 months under the 200-day moving average. And I don't mean to bore you with technical analysis, but in my mind, that was a relatively major correction. So in my mind, this rally is only 2 years old. And business cycles and stock market rallies usually have an expiration date. That's obvious. But when the first 8 years of it was so swimming upstream and such a lackluster recovery, I think this one, to make an argument that this could get extended, both the economic cycle and the stock market, I think is appropriate. And I actually will even go so far as to say this year, we've only come up and taken out the highs that we put in January right before that vicious downturn we had within the last 2 weeks. So I think this bull market is not in any worry of like running out of steam. I think we'll have small corrective phases along the way, but I'm still pretty positive.
All right. He is Jim Iuorio, CNBC contributor, the proprietor of Brandt's in Palatine. You listen to the Kavanaugh hearings on AM 560 this morning, then go grab a burger at Brandt's for lunch.
Amen.
Jim, thanks so much.
There.
Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
And he joined us. Yeah, sorry. He joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Connect with Dan and Amy on the AM 560 The Answer mobile app. Just text the word app to 64636 to download the app today.
I'm Greg Clark.